Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about the yogurt shop murders from Austin, Texas in 1991. Buckle up, here we go. Welcome back to Legalese 123, where we are covering cases across America. Have you seen the HBO series on the yogurt shop murders? Oh, if you haven't, check it out. It details the 1991 murders of four teenage girls at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. Who they suspected, tried, convicted, and the conviction was overturned. It's 2025, 34 years later. Will they ever solve the case? On December 6, 1991, Jennifer Harbinson, Eliza Thomas, who were both 17 years old, were working their usual job at the yogurt shop. They were joined later by Jennifer's sister Sarah and her friend Amy Ayers. The girls were getting ready to close the shop at 11 p.m. But something strange happened instead. The next door neighbor, which was the party supply place, alerted authorities that there was a fire at the yogurt shop. When the crews got there and started putting out the fire, they came across a gruesome scene of the four deceased girls. They were found bound and gagged and shot in the head, and one of the girls was sexually assaulted. But there was money missing, so police suspected it was a robbery. The police had really nothing to go off, and some of the evidence was washed away when they put out the fire. The parents, family, and friends and police wanted answers. They had heard rumors that Maurice Pierce had a 22 caliber gun on him in the night in question. This was the same type of weapon that was used to kill the girls. They arrested him at a nearby mall. During his interrogation, he had stated that he was with Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellburn. They couldn't connect the kids to this murder. So in 1991, with no leads, they then reopened the case and sought their sights back on the four high schoolers. Over the case course of a lengthy interrogation, both Springsteen and Scott had confessed to the crime. They had implicated each other. They also implicated the other two teenagers. However, they later recanted, claiming police had used coercive and unethical interrogation tactics to obtain confessions, including holding a gun to Scott's head. The investigation into the four men was filled with inconsistencies and circumstantial evidence. There was no physical evidence that directly linked them to the crime. For instance, the gun carried by Pierce was a similar caliber to the murder weapon, but it was never definitively a match. Everyone believed that these four were guilty, and they were arrested in 1999. In 2000, the charges against Forrest Wellburn were dropped due to lack of evidence. June 2001, Robert Springsteen had a trial and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. September 2002, there was a trial for Michael Scott. He too was found guilty and got life. In 2003, the charges against Maurice Pierce were dismissed for lack of evidence. So how is it possible that Wellburn and Pierce were not found guilty for anything and were let go, but Scott and Springsteen held a trial and they were found guilty? As I mentioned earlier, both guys had confessed and implicated each other. In 2006, Springsteen's conviction was overturned based on an unfair trial. They also forgot about the confrontation clause. Scott wouldn't testify against Springsteen, and Springsteen wouldn't testify against Scott. The Sixth Amendment guarantees a criminal defendant the right to confront witnesses against them in court. Even though their convictions were overturned, the prosecution hadn't made up their mind yet if they were going to try them again. But there was one element that could exonerate all of the suspects, and this was DNA. Police Detective John Jones did an excellent job preserving as much evidence as he could before the girls were removed from the shop. And in this process, they were able to collect DNA off of Amy. She really fought hard. John Jones never gave up on solving this case. In 2008, the defense lawyers for Scott and Springsteen requested that the DNA be tested. No matches were found. The DNA on Amy was not a match to the four suspects: Pierce, Wellborn, Scott, or Springsteen. So, what now? The case is cold again, but it's evident that Scott and Springsteen had nothing to do with the murders. So, where does that leave us now? In 2021, the House Judiciary Committee passed legislation giving families of cold case victims the opportunity to petition the federal government and re examine cases older than 3 years. Later that year, it was announced that there was advanced DNA technology that were bringing investigators closer and ever to solving crimes. Later again that year, Joe Biden signed the Homicide Victims Family Rights Act into law, which motivated the yogurt shop murders. The law is intended to help ensure that federal law enforcement agencies review cold case. Also, it states that they can also make requests to other agencies. So, have you heard of IgG? IgG is called investigative genetic genealogy. It's coming up in a lot of cases that either haven't been solved or cold cases. Investigative genetic genealogy is known as forensic genetic genealogy. It's the emerging practice of utilizing genetic information from direct to consumer companies to identify suspects or victims in criminal cases. As of December 2023, it has helped solve 651 crimes, including 318 individual perpetrators who were brought to life. Have you ever used Ancestry.com or 23andMe to find out your genetic genealogy? Well, investigators work alongside these companies to find a genetic profile from DNA left behind at crime scenes to help find perpetrators. We're seeing more cases being solved using IgG. In the Idaho 4 murders, Kohberger had left his DNA on a knife sheath. And in the case of Teresa Fusco out of Long Island back in 1984, where there was DNA left at the scene, it's then later tied to Rex Heuermann, who was recently arrested. Both of these cases, the DNA was analyzed at Othram Labs in Texas. In the yogurt shop murders, they used Parabon Nanolabs, which is where C.C. Moore works out of Virginia. She has helped solve hundreds of cases. So if these 4 guys didn't kill these girls, who did? Remember, there was DNA recovered from the scene as well as a bullet casing found in the drain. Amy Ayers was sexually assaulted, so she also had DNA from her rape kit. So why did it take so long for them to submit the DNA to test via IgG? Let's listen to how investigators figured out who committed these heinous crimes.
Just sort of a historical picture of what this looked like in the days after the yogurt shop caught on fire. As you can see, it appears to be just your everyday middle America retail space in a strip mall. Here's a diagram. It's a bird's eye view just of a sort of layout of the building. If you're not familiar with this case, the customers would be there in the front, obviously, and then in the back is where the fire was started and the girls' bodies were discovered. Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer were together, and Amy was a little bit closer to the front. So the gist of the MO of this case was the perpetrator entered or remained near closing time when no other customers were present. The girls were found nude and had been tied up with their own clothing as ligatures and bindings. There was evidence of sexual assault. All 4 had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber pistol, and Amy was also shot with a .380 pistol. And then the building was set on fire before the suspect left the scene. Remember, this is 1991. This is not 2025, so DNA technology is primitive at best, okay? But the detectives back then had the foresight to go ahead and collect what evidence they could and had swabs taken for possibly DNA testing or some sort of testing that maybe in the future. They did it both at the scene and at the autopsies, which turned out to really help us with the amount of DNA we were able to get later. Some of the only really physical evidence that was recovered was a spent .380 shell casing that was located in the floor drain. There were no .22 caliber casings recovered. And the fire and then the water from the fire department basically destroyed pretty much anything else that you were going to try to collect or try to process as a crime scene. Back then, they got thousands and thousands of tips that came in, a lot of quote confessions from different people, but it led to nowhere and no arrests were ever made. There was one confession from a juvenile named Maurice Pierce. 8 days after the murders, Pierce was at North Cross Mall, which is down the street from the yogurt shop, and he's with his friend named Forrest Welburn. He was carrying a .22 pistol in his waistband. He was 16 at the time, and he was arrested for the possession of the pistol and taken down to the homicide office, where he was interrogated for several hours by Detective Hector Polanco. At the end of it, he confessed, and the next morning he spoke to the lead detective, Detective John Jones, as well. I'm not going to go into the details too much here, but basically Pierce confessed that he had lent the .22 to his friend Forrest, and Forrest claimed that he had killed the girls. When Forrest Welburn was questioned, he mentioned that his two other friends, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, along with Pierce, had all gone to San Antonio the night after. Back then, the police interviewed all four, and they were eliminated as suspects. The ballistics on the .22, to see if it would try to match it with the fragments from the murder scene, were inconclusive at best. The projectiles are highly fragmented and distorted. I can tell you that is not an issue that has been overcome since with new technology. I had them looked at just a couple months ago, and still the ballistics expert was like, there's not much we can do because they're so fragmented. So then the case stalls over the next 5 years or so. The personnel gets scaled back. They had several task forces come and go. But in 1999, the new task force revisited this Maurice Pierce confession. And they go ahead and interrogate 4 subjects, the 4 from that had been originally interviewed back in 91 or early 92. Maurice Pierce, Forrest Welburn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott were reinterrogated in several years later. During the interrogations, they were able to get confessions from Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. They were not able to get confessions from Forrest Welburn or Maurice Pierce at that time. All 4 subjects were arrested for capital murder in 1999. Forrest ended up being no-billed by the grand jury, and Pierce's charges were eventually dropped. Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen were put on trial separately. Both were found guilty, pretty much based on each other's confessions and implicating each other. Michael Scott received life without parole, and Robert Springsteen received the death penalty. There was never any physical evidence linking them to the yogurt shop. Of course, they go through the appeals process like any other murder trial. While they're on appeal, or while they're appealing their conviction, a landmark Supreme Court case comes out called Crawford v. Washington. It reformulated what hearsay statements can be admitted in criminal cases under the Sixth Amendment. Basically, you can't use someone else's written or videotaped confession against somebody else if they themselves are not taking the stand. You can't cross-examine a video. You can't cross-examine a written statement. And then, so that's what was used in their trials. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeal granted them a new trial for Springsteen and Scott. So in preparation for the new trial, the district attorney's office and the police department decided they needed to get some physical evidence to link them to the crime. By this time, DNA had come a long way, and we had a new technology called YSTR, YSTR testing. YSTR testing looks at genetic information on the male chromosome only, and they were able to get a profile from a sexual assault kit that had 16 markers, or 16 locations with genetic data on it, on the Y chromosome. The kit only tests for specific 16. All 4 of the original suspects were excluded from this profile. In 2009, the charges were dropped pending further investigation. Then over the next several years, hundreds of reference samples were collected for elimination or suspect profiles. First responders, family, friends, any potential suspects, associates. I think we tested 300 or 400 different people in this case over the years. So since 2008, they've tried numerous testing strategies, sent numerous things across to numerous labs. I think we've had 13 different labs over the last 20 years. The difficult part is most of the DNA that was collected is only a few picograms. So we're talking cells, and it's often a mixture with the victim. It's extremely difficult. In 2018, the unknown Y profile was resubmitted for retesting because there had been technological advancements. Now, upon further testing, the YSTR was expanded out to 27 markers, 27 genetic locations, or locations of genetic information for a more complete profile. It's 25 markers, but 2 of those have a double allele to give you 27 total. However, the identity of the profile remained unknown. But also about this time, we're starting to find this YSTR profile on other items taken from the girls, or other swabs. I inherited the case in June of 2022 and spent the first few months sort of reviewing it. But one of the first things I did was I met with a group of subject matter experts on DNA and genealogy, and we sat around a round table. They were having, some of them are here today, and they were here for a conference, so I was able to get them all in one room together. And we sort of went through the evidence. I wanted to know what I had and what I could do with it. And we kind of came up with a tiered system of best to worst things that we might be able to do something with. And that's where this all kind of hatched. Several items were tested, and we didn't have a whole lot of luck. But fast forward to late June of 2025. I was researching the spent 380 casing that was found on the floor drain to see where it was now and what we could maybe do with it, if anything, and just researching the chain of custody. I don't know what made me go down that rabbit hole that morning, but I did, and I'm glad I did. What I found was that it had not been submitted into the NIBIN system in many years. NIBIN is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. It's kind of like CODIS for shell casings. You can put it in there, and it'll tell you if it's linked to other shell casings and other crimes. It had been put in there a couple times, but it had been a long time. So I spoke with the ATF guys here. A couple of them are here. Jonathan, you're here. And I asked him about it, and he said, well, whether it's in there or not, if it had been many years, resubmit it, because the software has gotten so much better. I mean, we're talking like 3D stuff now, so go ahead and do it. It's not going to hurt. And of note, and this is important later, the original ballistics report said that in all probability, the weapon used from that 380 projectile was limited to an AMT brand backup model 380 handgun that was used to kill Amy. So that's important later. The morning of July 2nd, the ATF sent the 380 cartridge, and that afternoon I was notified of a hit out of Kentucky, an unsolved murder out of Kentucky. So I can't name the name of the city. They haven't done their press release yet, but they know who they are, and they did a fantastic job. But myself, a couple others from the cold case unit, and Mindy Monfort from the AG's office, we flew up to Kentucky to review our cases with their detectives. And the murders did share similar details. I can't go into those. But the preliminary NIBIN results indicate a presumptive positive correlation between the two casings, indicating the same gun was used in Yogurt Shop as it was several years. I'm not going to even tell you the date. Oh, it's up there, 98. So all the way to 1998. So when we traveled up there to Kentucky. I took the casing with me so we could do a one-to-one by a tool mark examiner for a definitive comparison as required, just like if fingerprints and DNA, you still have to do the one-to-one to get it definitive. Results are pending. We should have those this week, but NIBIN has a crazy high accuracy record, and it's also gets peer reviewed before we even send it. So it's in all likelihood. But aside from the MO and the NIBIN hit, there were no obvious links between the two cases. So we kind of sat down and decided, well, what are we going to do next? How are we going to solve these cases together, assuming they are related? And we worked with them on a testing strategy of some items because their case had been cold and they hadn't been worked in quite a few years. So they had some items that could be submitted and retested, including the sexual assault kit. I reached out to their lab and asked them if they had a Y profile in their case, and they had not done one yet. So I requested that they go ahead and do one so we could compare it to our unknown Y and see if in fact we are talking about the same individual. That sort of gave me the idea of, can you also, while you're at it, manually check all your Y profiles in Kentucky and see if you have a profile from another case, another crime that matches ours. If this guy's from Kentucky, perhaps he's already in their database. This is not something you can it's automated search like CODIS, it has to be a manual search. Because we had tried this once before, nationally. Back in 2018 and into 2019, Dr. Kadavy had reached out to the different labs across the country who do YSTR testing and retain those profiles and asked if they could manually search against our unknown. They returned 0 profile matching. Nobody in the country, at least nobody, it was about six labs or so returned information. Not a lot of labs were doing it back then. So I said, well, it's been a few years, more labs are doing this, databases are getting a little bigger. Let's do it nationwide again. And so we reached out to all of the labs in the country that do YSTR typing and asked if they could manually search against our unknown profile. And we got a match, we got a hit, only one. The South Carolina State Lab was the only lab in the country that responded that they had a match, quote match, to our unknown YSTR. All the others had no hits at that level. And I'm talking, this is at 27 to 27 markers. This is the full profile, and every allele was the same. So it took us a couple of weeks. The results were reviewed for accuracy, and their legal department reviewed it. Those were like the longest 2 weeks because we knew we had somebody, but they wouldn't tell us, so it was a long 2 weeks. The reason it took 2 weeks to review, I found out later, is because they wanted to make sure they were doing it right, because I was the first person to ever ask them for this. Nobody had requested a manual search against their database before, so they wanted to make sure that legally they were on the right footing and that there was no quality assurance issues. So on August 22nd, they sent me the information, and it was from a sexual assault and murder from 1990 out of Greenville, South Carolina. And this was the profile that they had, Robert Eugene Brashers. He has a perfect 27 for 27 match to our unknown profile in Yogurt Shop. I got on the phone with Greenville, South Carolina immediately, and we started conversations about our different cases, how they similar. And one of the things he said to me was, he said, he didn't know anything about the case, he didn't know what it was, and he said, your victims, were they bound with their own clothing? And the hair stood up the back of my neck, and I knew we were maybe getting somewhere finally with this case. And so I asked for some biological evidence to be sent to me so we could do a one-to-one comparison on the Y, and also to have population statistics done by Signature Science to see how rare this particular Y profile might be. Not all Ys are created equal. So this particular Y profile is very rare. They had never really seen it before, and their population statistics estimated that it's only 0.12% of the US population. So now we're getting somewhere that, we're building a case here that this is Brashers, but still 0.12%, we need to be at 100%, but we're getting there. He's starting to look better and better. Just real quickly, Mr. Brashers was arrested on December 12th, 1985, pled this second-degree homicide and aggravated battery. This is in Florida, where he made unwanted sexual advances towards a woman. She tried to leave, and he shot her multiple times. Thankfully, she survived and was able to give a description. He was arrested later that night. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, he only did about 4, and he was granted parole in May of 1989. After he died, Chief already went over some of his known cases, but after he died, basically DNA linked multiple unsolved murders and sexual assaults across the country to him. Between 2006 and 2017, they knew that they had a serial killer in these different jurisdictions, but they didn't know who he was. It wasn't until 2018, the very sort of infancy of genetic genealogy, that these detectives, some of them who are here today, got together and collaborated on how are we going to identify this guy. So they thought about doing genealogy, and they used Parabon Labs to send his DNA and build a profile, and then look for any relatives in the genealogical database. They found some distant relatives and sort of triangulated and sort of kind of built his family tree, and they said, this Brashers guy's got a violent history, you should probably get reference samples to see if it's him. So they reached out to his family, they were able to get a reference sample. The DNA showed this, yes, this is a close relative, probably a brother. So at that point, they got a judge's order to have him exhumed out of Arkansas, and they retrieved biological evidence from the body to develop a profile for CODIS. And in 2018, that DNA testing confirmed that all of those unsolved up there and were all from Mr. Robert Brashers. So he's good for the sexual assaults and murders throughout the 90s that he never had to stand trial for. So talking with the detectives, they tell me how he had multiple, and we found this out too, but that he had multiple fake IDs. The guy even faked his own obituary and put it in the newspaper to establish a new identity. Although then he was named as a groomsman in a wedding a few weeks later, so it didn't really work out for him. But he had multiple aliases, combination of family names. He had known criminal history in multiple states. And according to his daughter, she was interviewed years later after this all came out, and she said, yeah, well, he would travel for work and was gone weeks at a time. That she didn't think about it back then as a child, but looking back, it was kind of odd. And her mom would ask her to call the dad by a different name at times. So we start researching this guy on our end. How is he related to our case? I'm take you back to December 6, 1991. The yogurt shop murders occurs about 11 p.m. We start researching Brashers, figure out what he's doing around this time, where he's at. December 8th, 1991, less than 48 hours after Yogurt Shop, Robert Brashers is stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint going westbound on I-10 between El Paso and Las Cruces. It was a random cold stop, just like any time you go through a border checkpoint, except the Border Patrol agent realized something was up. He didn't like the way Mr. Brashers was answering, seemed kind of suspicious, and so he looked into this guy a little further, ran his plate, and it showed to be a stolen car out of Georgia. It had been stolen on November 29th. During this interaction, he was also in possession of a .380 pistol. That .380 pistol was an AMT backup model, that serial number, the A75213. This is the same make and model identified by ballistics as the weapon used in the yogurt shop. He actually did evade from there. He was able to get back into his truck and drive down about a mile, but then he stopped and gave up. We believe he probably threw out any other evidence he may have had from the yogurt shop, possibly the .22, because it was very dark out there. There's no artificial light. So he's charged with auto theft and felon possession. It goes federal. He does about 4 years. However, at some point, the gun is released back to his father, which is not an easy thing to do. You got to jump through a bunch of hoops to get your gun back after a crime. But it is released to his father, because Brashers really wanted that gun back. His YSTR has been found in the following 3 places. This is 3 sexual assault kits of those young girls. There are limitations to YSTR. While this guy looks good, we're building a case, there are some limitations. It only looks at markers found on the male chromosome, so if you ever had a female suspect, you're out of luck. It's not necessarily unique to one individual, like autosomal STRs used in CODIS. STRs are passed down paternally. So me and my brother have the same YSTR profile, unless there's some sort of mutation. So the further away you are related, you'll see more mutations. Certain combinations of these alleles are more frequent than others, so you could get several, quote, hits from a database that have no relation to the crime. They're really good at eliminating suspects and donors, but are difficult for a positive ID. It's hard to get 100% or with certainty with just a YSTR. It's a statistical probability of how many people are expected to also have that same Y. In this case, we know Mr. Brashers had a unique Y at 0.1% of the population. So September 15th, we took additional items to DNA Labs International, and we're trying to figure out how to get from we're pretty sure it's him to we know it's him. Now, these items have been previously tested in years past, and while they were screened for male DNA, they were very, very low quant and very fragmented and degraded. So they were preserved. Of maybe someday we could do something with this, but we can't today. We would just be wasting the DNA because we don't think we're ever going to be able to get enough DNA for a CODIS upload. There's just not enough quality or quantity to meet the threshold that CODIS requires to search. So you would just be consuming DNA for no reason. So we decided, well, now we've got a different testing strategy. We don't necessarily need to upload to search. We just need enough DNA to compare. And those are 2 different thresholds. So we need enough STR markers to do a direct comparison from our crime scene to Robert Brashers. So we identified some items that could be done, that possibly, and this was going to be it. We were pushing all of our chips on the table with this. This was going to be the last shot effort with some of this DNA. But we were pretty confident with the technology and the circumstances that this was going to be pay dirt. One of the things we retested was Amy's fingernail clippings from the autopsy. They were able to get quite a bit of STR, probably get DNA out of Amy's fingernail clippings, and it was directly compared to Brasher's profile, and it matched so that it's 2.5 million to 1 that it's likely Robert Brasher's underneath Amy's fingernails than it is to an unknown individual. September 22nd, DNA from Kentucky murder was directly compared to Brasher's, and at this point, he cannot be excluded. Final report is pending. They've got their DNA, but they got to do a little more work on it. But at this point, it appears to be him, and our ballistics report is still pending. So just a bit about his MO. Because there's questions about how the yogurt shop could be one person with multiple guns. He was known to carry multiple weapons. We have that documented in other cases. He's known to tie his victims, sometimes with their own clothing. He's known to sexually assault young female victims when given the opportunity. He often shot the victim in the head, and in Kentucky we know it was the same gun in similar details to yogurt shop, and now similar DNA. At this point, there's no physical evidence that links Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Wellborn to the yogurt shop crime scene. There's no evidence that connects the previous 4 suspects with Robert and Gene Brasher's either. The surviving victims of Brasher's violence always reported he was alone when he acted. He never was known to have an accomplice. And we have a documented case, because they survived, where he was able to do a home invasion. He controlled 4 women alone, tied them up, and sexually assaulted one of them in 1997 in Memphis. So that's something he is able to do, is 4. In 1999, after standoff with police, he had 2 guns during then, but he chose actually the lesser powerful one of the 2 to kill himself with. He used an AMT 380 model backup pistol with serial number A75213 that he was stopped with 2 days after yogurt shop. Same gun. Now, I just want to reiterate that this is a combination of technology, good police work from multiple agencies and cooperation, and timing. Because, for example, the Kentucky case, they didn't resubmit their knife and shell casing until last year. So this is something that could not have happened until 2025. And I'm sorry that it took 30, 40 years for us to get here, but we're here now. And, Amy's final moments on this earth were to solve this case for us. It's because of her fighting back. So, thank you.
Well, can you believe it? They finally solved this with IgG and DNA. So it was announced just this September that the DNA matched Robert Eugene Brasher's, as well as the bullet casing had matched the gun that he used to kill himself. Brasher's is a deceased serial killer. He had committed 7 murders from 1990 to 1998 in the states of Missouri, South Carolina, and Texas. He is also going to be connected to many, many other crimes now that they have his DNA. As this detective stated back in 2018, they had exhumed his remains and conducted additional testing to confirm what his DNA was in reference to the Parabon Labs and the genetic IgG. So, on January 13th, 1999, police officers noticed that there was a stolen vehicle that had been parked in a parking lot of a Super 8 motel in Missouri. After speaking with the motel personnel, it was established that Brasher's and his family had arrived in that vehicle just days earlier. Officers then broke down the door and found him hiding under a bed with a loaded gun. When they attempted to arrest him, he started to resist and opened fire. The officers were forced to retreat and call for backup. But just moments later, with all of the police surrounding the motel, Brasher took his wife and stepdaughters hostage. Approximately 4 hours later of negotiations, he released the hostages and he attempted to shoot himself. He remained alive for about 6 more days, but he succumbed to complications from his injuries. And on January 19th, he was pronounced dead, and it was ruled as a suicide. So, investigative genetic genealogy is a highly controversial technology, despite its success of solving hundreds of cold cases and current cases. The controversy centers over ethical and legal implications of using DNA from consumer genetic genealogy databases for law enforcement purposes, particularly concerning privacy, consent, and its broad reach. But IgG is here to stay, and other methods are being developed to further identify suspects. It is amazing to finally have solved this crime after 34 years. And the 4 lives, Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy, can now finally rest in peace. And so happy that their family finally has an answer. So stay tuned to Legalese 123 for more true crime cases.